Welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. My name is Ben Mangan. I am the executive director of our Center for Social Sector Leadership, or CISL, which is just fun to say. I also teach here on our faculty, and it is a pleasure to welcome you here, and really a pleasure and a privilege to have Bob Friedman, our speaker, here today. I have had the incredible honor and privilege of knowing and working with Bob for almost 20 years. He has been a mentor and a friend and a colleague, and exemplifies so much of what we try to impart to the Haas community, to the Berkeley community, about the way you practice effective leadership in general and the way you practice effective leadership for social change. So you may have noticed, I'd be actually a little worried for you if you hadn't noticed, that our country is in the midst of a real national reckoning about issues of privilege, opportunity, and prosperity, or the lack thereof. And one of the reasons that reckoning is happening is because the inequality and inequity, when you look at wealth in the United States, is growing to just staggering proportions. But another reason that we're having this conversation and this reckoning is because of Bob's leadership. And he's probably nodding, shaking his head no, or he would never admit this, but it's true. So Bob has been an absolutely tireless leader on the question of how we generate prosperity for every American who is interested in working towards creating their own fate. And having a society that enables that, encourages it, does it fairly, and having the reckoning and the conversation in a very real way that looks at the role of race and racism, gender and sexism, all of the isms, all of the centuries and millennia-old systemic challenges that stand in the way to creating equity and opportunity for everyone in this country and in other countries. And so it is not an accident that we're having this conversation and this reckoning. It is in part because of the leadership of people like Bob. He's been working on this for decades. And one thing I'll just surface is that we are in the land of expecting incredible disruption within like 12 months. Well, sometimes it actually takes like 30 years, especially when you're trying to solve exceptionally complex challenges like the one that Bob has been trying to solve. So he finally took a break after founding Prosperity Now. He has been the co-founder of countless other organizations, including the one that I ran for many years. He finally took a break from his role leading organizations and building movements to write about this. And part of what I love about his book, I have it here, Sparking Prosperity for Everyone, a few $1,000s. Part of what I love about his book is that he doesn't just talk about the problem. He has a huge focus on a solution, a proven solution. And he's going to talk about this, among other things. And I, without further ado, will turn it over to you, Bob.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Is it okay if that blinds me and then I can't see you? So I'll try and move around. Ben, thank you. You know, I wish for you all to have the kind of partnerships through your career that I've been able to have with Ben and innovators like him, who are ready to bring together public and private and nonprofit and kind of all sectors and to do things in new ways. I feel very fortunate to be here and very grateful that you chose to spend your lunch here. To me, you're the future. And I believe in a future much better than the present. And I believe that you're the way there. So thank you. I thought I would talk for about 30 minutes. I hope Ben stopped me. Really about kind of 7 to 10 minutes on 3 topics. People, or economic development, if you prefer, money or capital, and the future. And I'm happy if you, interrupt if you want, and then hopefully we'll get into more discussion afterwards. And I hope when you ask questions, you'll identify yourself so I can get to know you. I believe that real economic development comes from the bottom up. And that economic development is combining resources in new ways to add value. It is not a zero-sum strategy. It is a positive-sum strategy. You also consider that entrepreneurship writ large. Again, combining resources in new ways with the individual vision and talent. For 40 years at Prosperity Now, and the field that has grown around the country and the world, I think we've proven that given a reasonable opportunity, common people will start businesses, create jobs, buy and keep their own homes, go to college, create wealth for themselves, their families, the communities, and ultimately the country. I think this is written deep in our history, and certainly in the practice and policy development of the last 30, 40 years, but really even longer. I think too often we operate in a zero-sum mindset where inevitably for someone to gain, someone else has to lose. I don't believe that's the case. And I think we rob ourselves of the potential talent that's around. Again, for 40 years, Prosperity Now and our partners, like formerly Earn, I guess Save Her Life Now, and others around the country, have been, proving that given an opportunity, low income, even very poor people, disproportionately women, people of color, people locked out of the mainstream economy, will in fact go forward and create wealth given an opportunity to do so. And there are not that many paths forward. I mean, it is, I think, saving, and I'll come back to that. It is entrepreneurship, business creation. It is home ownership, which has a range. Actually, I think maybe I brought a slide. Maybe I should mention, I'm not very good at coordinating with slides, but I think good development builds we actually went out, we were given a grant by the Mott Foundation once, and they said, find out what works in economic development. And I thought, well, maybe I'd find that training didn't, but enterprise creation did. Instead, what we found, what our researcher came back and said is, well, I can find examples of every strategy that works or doesn't work. The commonality of what works is it builds what he called efficacy, learning, and linkage, which our editor changed to confidence, competence, and connections, to which I would add capital. And I'll come to that in a minute. I thought it was a different slide next, but we'll actually gives me a good segue. I think I will leave that part there. But with the one conclusion is, Van Jones says we're leaving genius on the table. And I believe that we're treating people as consumers, not producers. And we're consigning fully half the country outside the economic mainstream without the capital to enter and to play. And we do that to our own detriment. The other thing I want to say is for the last 100 years, or at least the better part of the last century, we've been dealing with poverty by increasing income support, income maintenance, social services, which I think has reduced hunger, has reduced homelessness, has reduced poverty, but it doesn't provide a way out. And functionally, it treats people, again, as consumers, not as producers, as beneficiaries, trainees, maybe employees, but not as entrepreneurs, homeowners, creators of wealth. And I think the task for the 21st century is to build the ladder, to make sure that everyone, it's the old promise of America, that everyone has a chance to build a life for themselves and their families and their communities. This brings me to capital. It's only one of the essential elements, but I think it's an essential one. People talk a lot about income inequality. Finally, they're starting to talk about wealth inequality or asset inequality. And even though that's just another form of money, I think it has very different dynamics. The wealth gap is much greater than the income gap. So 16% of the population is income poor, but 40% plus, depending how you define it, have no or negative investable assets. And that goes up to 2/3 to 3/4 of people of color, women, others excluded from the economic mainstream. And again, if you look at the race, white men like me are way, near the finish line before you ever start. And women, people of color, are way behind. So, and that's exacerbated by our tax system. There are a lot, actually, it's the creation of a lot of things over the year. I will talk about some of the great wealth building policies of our history: universal public education, the Homestead Acts, to which 25% of Americans today can attribute their wealth, the creation of the 30-year mortgage by the federal government, which brought home ownership into the purview of the middle class. 110 years ago, 10% of people owned their own homes because you had to come up with the full cost of the house, at day one, or at least half of it. And we changed that. We opened the system up. And then my favorite example would be the GI Bill. We said to the returning GIs who saved this country, okay, you saved the country, we will provide you low interest home loans, business loans, education loans. And we tripled the middle class in a decade. We turned the income distribution from a pyramid to a diamond in that time. 5 million new homeowners, 9 million new college students. We democratized college, much to the chagrin of the president of Harvard, who thought we were ruining it, and about 600,000 new businesses. But we did it for white men, as had all those other pieces. With the Homestead Acts, it was land we stole from Native Americans and denied, by and large, to people of color. It's a great policy, inequitably administered. And the same with the GI Bill. It turned out that, we never provided it to the 17 million women who were the arsenal of democracy. We did it, the head of the Veterans Affairs Committee, John Elliott Rankin, was an out-and-out racist from Northeast Mississippi. He was fine on economic development for white men. He was one of the fathers of the TVA. But he was deliberate in making sure that administration of the GI Bill was left to state and local officials operating in the South under Jim Crow, but the northern states weren't much better. In 1947, New Jersey, New York initiated 60,000 home loans, home mortgages. 100 of them went to people of color. So we stay today with an economically bifurcated economy and people. So African Americans, Latinx, other people of color have 6, 7 cents, depending how you measure it, for every dollar whites have. And that's a huge financial disparity, but the psychological disparity there is even greater. If you're paying last month's or last year's bills, you're not feeling very good about yourself. You're not necessarily planning ahead. You're not seeing a future. You don't have the luxury to imagine how things might change. What I discovered, much to my surprise, looking back at our self-employment programs or IDA programs, these are match savings programs, or as one welfare mom said, "Oh, I see what you mean. You mean a 401k, except for me." That a few $1,000s could change a life. Again, the magic there is not the few $1,000s. It's the imagination and the dreams and the work and the effort of people. But without a little bit of money and a little bit of psychological space, I think you never are able to see ahead. So I talk about, past money, present money, future money. And I think we need that future money as much as we need the past and the present, the ability to pay for current bills. The tax system today is, I think, our expression of wealth policy. And by and large, we reward the rich, miss the middle, and penalize the poor. So at the federal level, we spend $700 billion a year, plus or minus. That's with a B. On family wealth building incentives, home mortgage interest deduction, preferential capital gains rates, pension fund exclusions, 529 college savings programs. If you look at those programs, they're mostly based on tax deductions, which are more beneficial the higher your income is. Home mortgage deduction doesn't help you buy a house. It's a reward for owning, or really for owing, on a house. The wealthiest 0.1% of Americans making $1 million a year on average, get an average annual benefit from those wealth building tax subsidies of $160,000 a year. Working families making under $55,000 a year get an average annual benefit from those same programs of $226, one for every 800. So, the private sector is doing a fine job of generating wealth inequality in this country. I don't think we need to be subsidizing it. And again, the state tax codes, which draft off the federal, do the same thing. So you can add to that $700 billion another 100 or 200 billion. I think turned around, that's opportunity. Particularly, it averages out to just the federal piece, $2,200 for every man, woman, child in the country every year. I ask you, what difference would it make if everyone got that, or if better than that, we did match savings at a 4-to-1 rate for the poorest fifth of the country, and then maybe 1-to-4, 25%, even at the highest levels, to shrink I think we could shrink, if not eliminate, the racial wealth divide in our lifetimes, and free just a surge of new businesses, jobs, homes owned, educations pursued. Which brings me to kind of the last piece. I guess I would summarize it that I think we need a GI Bill for the 21st century, this time for everyone, based on match savings, I don't think we need more debt. We need to create an economic place to stand for everyone. I think I would still go with the three basic uses: home, business, education, or probably just savings. You can add automobiles, assistive technology for people with disabilities, and we could finance it just by making fair what we're already spending without spending a dollar more. Let me give you one other example. This actually, a home is so much more than just a house. It really becomes, it's the nest. It's where you go from. It's an area of safety and also aspiration, a safe space to become who you are. And you know, we engineered, it was the predatory lending prior to 2008 that led to the downfall in 2008. And then since then, Steven Mnuchin and his friends in the White House and others, you know, actually bought those, you know, we bailed out the financial institutions and we never bailed out the homeowners, disproportionately people of color who lost their homes. And instead, 5 million homes are now assets of the rich, not homes for everybody. We can go into that more. So this is the other. I offer in the book kind of a general prosperity bill or prosperity accounts, funded by half the what we already spend, which I think could provide money to, what's the other slide, 326 or 340 million Americans. But I also think we could do it for home, for business, and for kids, and education, and for basic savings. And this would be, it's my name for baby bonds, you may have heard of, or child savings accounts. People talk about death taxes as though they're something bad. I love death taxes. I mean, I feel like who better to tax than the dead? They don't really complain a whole lot. And the truth is that the wealth they leave with is produced a lot by the society and the economy, and because of the opportunity they're given. So the estate tax, I think, is a fair and great leveler that we have over the last 15 years dismantled. If we just restored it to where it was in 2005, we could afford a nest egg for every kid of at least, $5,000 for the poorest fifth, and then more for everyone. We could do it for everybody. We know from research that a kid with a college savings account in her own name is 3 times more likely to go to college and 4 times more likely to attend, even with less than 500 in the account. It's a matter of expectation. If you expect that you're going to college, if your parents expect that you're going to college, you probably will. I think I'll stop there with 2 more things. You know, I believe in the promise of this country and the premise of this country, that if everybody has a chance, we will all do better. And again, I don't think you have to be altruistic about this. You have to be respectful. And I think it's a win-win. I guess the final thing that I would say is, you know, I'm getting to an age where I'm headed toward mentorship, but I think we know how to do these things. You know, we did the GI Bill. We know how to do that. We have huge account systems, 401k, 403b. We know how to do match savings. We just need to do it in a way that liberates and unleashes the potential of the people of this country. And I hope that you all, as you change the world, look for ways of making markets inclusive. I mean, we have a predatory capitalism. I think there can be a democratic capitalism, you know, where everybody gets to play and gets to contribute their ideas and energy, and we will learn better ways of going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you. So we have a microphone here for people that would come to ask a question. Please come to the mic. Please actually just say who you are and ask your question, and we'll go from there.
First, I'd say thank you very much for that. It was interesting to hear, and the solutions you mentioned around savings and just removing, I think, reducing inequality. So, well, that, right. I'm Yinka. I'm a first-year MBA student. Yeah.
Great.
So I'm actually not American, just a bit of an outside perspective. And my question is, when you talk about reducing the tax benefits and maybe reducing from the wealthy to like people who are not as wealthy, what I see there is it's a political problem. I have this privilege. I wouldn't let go of it. So what do you think it would take? Because you're not just going to convince, do you think you want to convince people to give up their privilege, or what types of organizing do you think would help? As far as I can tell, the American politics is heavily influenced by, if you're wealthy, you can influence policies that favor you. So how would you get around that to move to let's redistribute wealth? It will cost some people benefits they like already. And what would it take to get that type of change? That's what I find.
It's a great question, and you may be right. Well, actually, our advantage here is if you look at how unequally we spend those tax incentives, it's really just the top 1 or 2% that are getting more than a few $100s. So yes, we would make the millionaires and billionaires worse off. Although I would argue, what's the benefit of living in a hopeful and expanding economy? So I think actually even the wealthy would be better off. But you can, on a dollar for dollar basis, we can make 97, 98% better off than, you know. So I think the numbers are there. I think people don't tend to look at the tax system. You know, you hear the word tax, I think, and people turn off, you know, that it's too complicated, that who wants to face taxes anyway. And I think most people are not aware of the benefits that are being conferred on the wealthy. So part of it is, I think, talking about it and talking about how we make progress. And again, I'm convinced that we'll all be better off if we do that. Now, rationality may not rule the day, but I think if we talk about it more, if we can draw, you know, the technicalities in the tax system are mind-numbing, but the big patterns, you know, are pretty bold and pretty understandable. So,
Right. Thank you.
thank you.
Hi, I'm Rick Denny, and a relic from a bygone era before the Haas family acquired this school. So if you look at well, I guess there is no primary system on the Republican side, despite a couple of people running. But if you, on the Democratic side, every single Democrat, including Sanders, including Warren, are utterly allergic to anyone worse off than some kind of fabled middle class. The absolute, I think was it Buttigieg or Sanders who gave like a 15-second soundbite about the Poor People's Campaign at some recent debate. Like, there is, how do we create anything even approaching? How do we force political will? I mean, if you compare the situation today with what Johnson did in the 60s, we're in a pathetic state. We don't even acknowledge that poor people exist. And from what I understand, sorry, I'll stop jib jabbering, but for comparison's sake, vaping killed like 7 people, became a national damn emergency. Poverty kills 250,000 people a year in the United States. We don't give a rat's ass.
So look, I think you get to the part of the center of the problem. As I wrote the book, I thought it was a book about capital, and I realized, no, it's really a book about people and about what you expect of people. And I do, where did I put? Again, for 40 years, we've worked with whole sets of low-income, very poor people. With self-employment, with home ownership, with IDAs, match savings for home business, education. And they're amazing. You know, they prove, I think in the book, I have 24 stories of individuals. So I think my basic answer to your question is we need to relook at who people are and what they're capable of. And we need to make bets on what the potential of people are. In my experience, most people are good. Most people want to do the right thing. Most people want to provide for their families. Most people want to be proud. We can tap into that, you know, and again, at our best, we believe in that. And I think one key is that we tend to think still that people earn their economic status. You know, and we underestimate, you know, we never look at wealth. I mean, I can't tell you how long I waited for people to start talking about wealth inequality rather than just income inequality. We don't tend to look at it. We don't look at the structure of it. We don't look at the fact that most of it is inherited. It's not a matter of merit, even though we, you know, assume or too easily see that wealth as a function of merit. And then we're, you know, given this repeatedly untrue myth that it's wealthy people who are the job creators and the wealth creators, and they're not. You know, I mean, particularly you can see it in entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is no great respecter of class. So I guess I hope by storytelling, you know, by revealing what people are capable of, and if I can find it, I wanted to just read you from one of my favorite stories in the book. So Elsie was born in the Desire Public Housing Project of New Orleans. She said to an absent dad and a single mom who had alcohol and drug issues. She said she assumes that growing up there must have been good things that happened to her, but she can't remember any. At age 9, she and her mother fled an abusive boyfriend and ended up in Denver in the snow, which she had never seen. And then they had a more attentive youth services division, and she was put into a series of 18 foster homes, none of them home. She found refuge in reading. she said she would go along reading books, and that was the way she learned about the world. And then in Denver, she encountered the Jim Casey Youth Opportunity Initiative for foster kids. Just so you may already know, but 3% of foster kids go to college. And this is her talking about her getting an individual development account, where her, well, it'll explain it. I thought it was too good to be true at first. This was the first time in my life that people invested in me and my individual goals. It was a literal investment in cold hard cash. I could save and watch it grow. I had had lots of programs, even some training in financial education, but this was the first time anyone put actual money that I could use for my future. If I've saved, they would match my savings $2 to 1. I was in work study. I didn't earn much, but I put money into my account monthly, sometimes only a few pennies, most often $15 a month. I saved $1,500 over 2 years. And she went on to graduate from college debt-free. She then thought law school was a form of social work, and entered and ended up $220,000 in debt, quit law school in her last semester and has never regretted it. She's now a neonatal nurse and nanny making a 6-figure income. But there's so many more stories like that, and they're all around, and if you ask people, you know, how they got to where they got, or these kind of stories come out. So I agree with the premise of your question. I do think, you know, we look down on people to our own detriment. But I think there's much more there.
We've got a couple more. Yeah, I think we've got someone waiting.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Thank you for coming to speak and share with us today. My name is Jared Wright. I am a MBA student here at the House School of Business. We've talked about a litany of different issues that are affecting our society today, and I'm curious, in the constellation of problems that we're facing, revolving around income inequality, taxes, equity, and the list goes on and on. Where do you see the inception point to be? Where is it that we start? Because these are really large wells to eat, and I'm wondering, where do you see that first bite to be? Which lane, and then of which lane, what step within that lane?
It's a great question. And you could have added a lot of other things, like mass incarceration, which I think a lot of people would prioritize other things. And again, I don't think there's any one answer or one silver bullet, but I actually do feel, and I try and prevent myself from being an economic determinist, but I do think economics is key, and I do think capital assets, and particularly fungible assets, are particularly powerful. Again, not just financially and economically, but also psychologically and socially. And I guess I think it goes back to the previous question, I think one of the ways to rehabilitate our opinion of each other is to show what people are capable of, to unleash, their potential. So that's kind of why I'm Johnny One Note on this. And again, it goes in lots of different ways, but we can't do everything. So I think your question's just right, is where do you start? What's the strategic and kind of multi-dimensional intervention that's possible to do? And again, I think this isn't everything, but we can afford it. We know how to do it. We have evidence if we want to look for it, and I don't love random assignment control group experiments, but we did a bunch of them, and we know that low income, even very poor people will save, not because it's easy, but because it's the price of stability and hope. And then if you have a system, and I think all these things are structures, if you have a structure that rewards that and builds on it and has progressive matches, I think we really can level the playing field and then, go on to other things. I don't, did that?
Excellent. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.
My name is Robbie Kilpatrick from the Commonwealth Club of California
Oh,
in San
great.
Francisco. Thank you very much for your, it's a bit low, but thank you very much for your remarks. Whether you're a new immigrant to the United States or your family have been here for a long time, nobody gives you a user manual for the United States. So one of the things I've noticed in my life is this consistent voters voting against their own best interests. So the system that you have described, whether it's discussed in an elite environment such as this or in a bar, I've heard similar conversations in bars with football games going. Nobody ever seems to get traction because people don't seem to actually understand how the system works. So whether Bernie Sanders says the system's biased against you, or what you were saying today, I don't think the average American has any concept of how the system really works, how it's structured, who benefits, how to plug into it and how to make it work for them. And so Trump and Trump-lights get elected by people who he absolutely doesn't represent. Can you speak to that? Because it is a behavioral phenomenon which I've not yet heard a good explanation for, why people consistently vote against their own best interests.
Again, a good question that I can only partially answer. I guess, I do think as Americans, we're particularly bad at understanding history and structures, right? So, I gave you the brief history of wealth disparity in the country. I don't think most people know that. I don't think it's that hard to understand or explain, or that it will actually, once you say it to people, that it will come as too much of a surprise. And then structures are a little harder to understand, and the tax system, has its own repellents in it. But again, I think, I know it's not fashionable now, but I do believe in truth. And I do believe that, if people pay attention, and actually as I've gone around on this book, I'm used to talking to elite audiences, but I've talked to taxi drivers and students. People get it. It actually doesn't take too much. It just takes triggering and some reinforcement of what they know.
So are you hopeful?
What's the alternative? Gloria Steinem has been a good friend, and she describes herself as a hopeaholic against all contrary evidence. I think we're in dark days, and I'm dismayed by what's going on. But I do think, at our best, this country represents an idea that's still right. And again, it's what's the who is it? The poet Langston Hughes. Let America be America again. America never was America to me. Let America be America again, the America that never once was, yet still must be. I just think we need to
Thank you.
live up
Thank you.
to our ideals.
Hi, I'm Lauren Walters. The puzzle that I'd be curious you're talking about, because I think that the situation you described didn't arise over the last 3 years. It's one that has existed for a long time. And I wonder about the way out of the puzzle being how you create a mass movement that combines people who have resources and people who don't. And both groups recognizing that in other countries, the persistence of the situation you describe leads to revolution. And it happens because people feel beaten down. People don't have opportunities. Even though, I mean, it was stunning really a week or so ago to see an editorial in the Wall Street Journal that described part of the economic problem in the United States being 60 or 70% of people, of our citizens haven't gone to college, who didn't have those opportunities. And that the quote elite, those who have, make decisions for everyone else. And that's a source of, and those who start college, the retention rate, the completion rate is horribly low. 30 or 40% of people who start college actually finish. So the puzzle I struggle with is how you create a movement, hopefully a nonviolent movement, to remedy these problems, because the seething and the failure of political leaders on either side to express outrage at homelessness or hunger or the massive income inequality that you've described is stunning.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, at some level, I mean, how dumb are we, right? I mean, I feel like if you lay out something that really is better for everyone, you know, or you can sink in, you know, in hatred and despair, I don't think the choice is that close. So I'm hopeful that if we talk about it, if we show, you know, this is something people are doing, you know, get people to connect with other folks and see, you know, kind of the amazing people we can be, and look at our own history. Again, we know how to do this, you know, and we can afford it. Again, we'll take away some from folks on top, but they have, you know, it won't hurt as much as they think. And I will also say, you know, there have been times where we've appealed across the political spectrum. So when we started working on children's account, universal children's accounts, or had the Aspire Act in Congress, Rick Santorum and Jim DeMint, now the head of the Heritage Foundation, were the co-authors, along with Chuck Schumer and Corzine at the time. So this is a politics, I mean, you know, obviously we're in a very, you know, partisan time, but if you get back to basics and you see what's happening at the local level, and with people, I think it's a persuasive story that people can learn from and remind us of what we should know.
Last two questions since we're running short on time.
Sorry, I'll try and be briefer on my answers.
I'm Anna
Hi.
Soibel. I'm an MBA
Anna.
student here at Haas.
Great.
And thank you so much for coming. I was curious, I think in the last decade we've seen a real growth of organizations that are trying to make saving either easier or automated or more appealing through behavioral economics, either nonprofits like Save Our Life or many, many for-profit companies also. And I was curious what you see as the role of those organizations, either in tandem with public policy or you know, working with it to increase savings for the lowest income Americans.
I think it's been great. and crucial. So the theory of change that we had at Prosperity Now is demonstrate what's possible in community practice with organizations like EARN, Save Her Life, or so many others. And there are lots of them. We have this prosperity community where we number about 25,000 individuals and organizations, and it's spreading. You know, the big thing in health now is to recognize the health-wealth connection. But then I think you also, so I think demonstrate at the local level that it works, how it works best, get the stories that I think are powerful, and the individual, you know, and test yourself against, does this really make a difference in individual lives? And I think we can prove that it does. And then address the policy barriers and levers. I mean, I think people can save. Poor people can save. So in the American Dream demonstration, people at half the poverty line. This is, at the time, $9,000 for a family of 4 a year. Saved about the same amount and at 2 to 3 times the rate of people who were at twice poverty line. People will do it, but you're not able to save a lot. So that's where I think you need the matches, and you need to apportion our taxes and benefits fairly. And I think, you know, Daniel Moynihan said we insist on feeding the birds by feeding the cows. It's high time we start feeding the birds directly. I think that's where we need to go. And then I think it's market development, right? I'm not talking, you know, talking about people as producers and as new entrants and new energy to the marketplace. So I think on all those, you know, lubricated by applied research and communications. And together, hopefully, we make progress. And I will say, finally, we have some candidates talking about it. You know, so Cory Booker had a wonderful American Opportunity Accounts proposal, didn't get much play, $1,000 for every kid, up to $2,000 a year for the poorest kids, so that by age 18, they have $46,000 funded out of death taxes, or restored death tax. I mean, we're beginning to get a repertoire and in real politics and in the real world. Thanks.
Good afternoon, and thank you. My name is Carla Mays. I am an alum of the executive program here at Haas, and I'm also a pre-PhD over at Citrix, working on equitable smart cities.
And you've done that for a long time.
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. Very long time. My question to you is about reparations, in the form of like home ownership, debt reduction, free college, things of this nature. What are some of your thoughts on reparations?
So I think Ta-Nehisi Coates made the case for reparations. I think the politics, the economics, and the sociology of reparations is harder than preparations. I mean, just doing fairly and wisely with what we're already spending now. I think if we build that platform, then you can do, you can have variable match rates. I think we need everyone in because of the dumb white men. But, I think you begin to build the platform. And again, we have a lot of those platforms. We just need to make them inclusive. And then we can go forward on that. And then look, I mean, there's tremendous injustice. But there's also resistance to admitting responsibility for the past. And so I think, again, kind of universal basic assets is an easier task, again, economically, socially, politically, than also universal basic income. I don't have any problem with universal basic income. And Michael Tubbs, Mayor of Stockton, is experimenting with it and, finding people use it well. But to, finance the Yang proposal, you're talking about finding $3 trillion. And I don't know where it is. At least with our existing asset building, wealth building policy, the money's there. Yeah. It just needs to be used better. So it just seems to me an easier move that can open the gateway to reparations looking past and then also beyond assets to income.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bob, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Do you have a few minutes to stick around?
Yeah, please.
Bob has a few minutes. Just stick around if you had questions.